What I wanted to do today was share my story of how I've gotten to where I am right now. And the hardest part for me about telling my story is figuring out where to begin. There's so many different entry points that could put a different spin on it. I decided to go back to where I was in my life at your age. Toward the end of college, still taking classes, including finance from Jim. Great class, by the way. Hope you're enjoying it. Thinking about a career, although honestly, not in a way that excited my professors or made my parents all that proud. Even though I was in school majoring in accounting and finance, that wasn't my first love at the time. Believe it or not, even as a senior in college, then a grad student, I wanted nothing more than to be a DJ. Crazy, right?
DJ Dylan Stone.
You remember.
Yeah.
It started on the radio. I even had my own stage name, as Jim remembers. It evolved into spinning records at nightclubs and bars, and then to private parties and weddings. I'm gonna hold up a photo. Hopefully you guys can see it. That coming through okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's me. I don't know how well you could make out the date stamp, but it's March 24th, 2000. This is one of my very first mobile DJ events. And it was the 50 days to graduation event for the senior class of 2000. There's another one from the same event. And had our semester not ended prematurely.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Now I can. When you had it, when you're talking, when you have it up against the thing, it's blocking it or something.
Oh, interesting. Well, what I'm saying is that had that event happened, had we not ended the semester in person prematurely, last Friday would have been my 20th straight year DJing that event. I still joke about this, but I don't think there was a student at Bonas who was out at parties more than I was, but I actually partied less than anybody I knew. I was there for the music. I was there for the rush from seeing that I could directly control how good of a time people were having on the dance floor. The money was good too, not gonna lie about that. So between scholarships and cash flow from DJing, I was able to graduate with zero debt. And that's been a reoccurring theme throughout my life: minimize personal debt as much as possible. Pay cash for everything to the extent that I can. So Jim obviously knows about my secret life as a DJ back then, probably because I would have to leave his 402 class early sometimes to be on the air at the radio station I worked at. Maybe he didn't know the extent to how serious I was about it. In fact, and Jim, this is gonna throw you off a little bit. I'm not sure if you still do this at the end of your 402 classes, but he wrote me this one-page summary of how I did presenting in his class. Do you still do this?
Not as often, because classes have gotten so big, I really can't do it for everyone, but yeah.
What's funny about this, and
oh no, I'm afraid.
If I could share my screen, you could read through it, but he starts off this by saying, "These comments are meant to help, but I do concede some of them may sting. And so in spite of the danger of alienating you, I will proceed."
Wow, okay.
What a way to start off a farewell to the semester. But honestly, most of the comments were positive. The one that I find the most humorous, and I don't think you'll be able to see this on the screen, so I'll read it, but it's in the bottom right-hand corner. You can still—
Tell your boss that this slow stuff has to go. I can't read it, and or ratings will drop like a stone.
Yeah, so you found some humor in me having to leave your class early from
Yeah.
time to time. So evidently you didn't want me playing songs under a certain number of beats per minute to
Yeah, I
mess
don't
with
know.
your running.
I don't remember it at all, but yeah.
Now, maybe you are in a position where graduation is in the crosshairs. Maybe you've got a job, maybe you've got grad school lined up, maybe you don't. But in either case, you will have at least some apprehension taking that step, especially into a world that is literally changing as we speak at a rate and in a way that is totally unprecedented. Go back in time a month ago now, you're on spring break, and could you have even fathomed that we would be here in this position right now? Even if COVID-19 went away tomorrow, our world doesn't just pick up where it left off. I think the long-term side effects of this will be profound and in ways that we can't fully comprehend right now. September 11th happened during my last year of college. And while it was a very different situation than what we're confronting now, in other ways, it did leave you with a similar kind of feeling. And I don't know what the right word is for it. Maybe grief is the right way to describe it. It was so sudden, so unexpected, so awful that it really cast a dark cloud over the rest of the school year. Now, there wasn't the ongoing threat of pandemic, but it did take a long time before we stopped wondering if the next attack was about to happen. Interesting sidebar on 9/11. It was one of those days that if you did live through it, you remember everything about it, where you were, what you were doing, how you felt. I could give you a minute by minute rundown of what I did that day. And I shared this story in my accounting class last semester for the first time. At 9 a.m. that morning, just around the time that the first plane hit the Trade Center, I actually had an interview and a tryout for the resident DJ position at this nightclub in Olean. Now, keep in mind, this is before the days of smartphones and social media. I didn't even have a cell phone until after I graduated college, which is just a wild concept nowadays. But bottom line, information just didn't transfer as quickly as it did back then. So I showed up at my interview early, having no idea what was about to happen in the world. Had I gotten there on time and not early, I likely would have heard the first bit of news about the attack. Had I heard that, I probably would have ditched the interview. If I ditched the interview, I most certainly wouldn't have gotten the job. And if I didn't get that job as a DJ, I would have never met the girl who ended up becoming the other Professor Bysiek. I guess the point of that story is you just can't know how a series of events that happen to you can completely reshape your future. This semester has been disrupted in a major way. If you're a senior, if you're a grad student and this is it for you, you might very well be thinking that you got a raw deal. Your last year of college, the last couple months, it's not supposed to play out in this Twilight Zone-like scenario. To the extent possible, though, I'd encourage you to start looking longer term. In 5 years, this is a shared experience that you'll discuss in much the same way I talk about 9/11, a really scary time that changed the world, but it is a world that you will go on living in. The part about not knowing the purpose behind events that affect your life is something that I want to expand on a little. And this is where I step off the soapbox and talk about something that I've never really talked about with anyone outside my very close family members. There's about 5 people in the world who know about this. And that number, based on how many participants we have in here today, is about to increase by a lot. So I'm a little bit nervous proceeding. I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable here, but I'm just gonna go with it. So taking you back to the months following 9/11, I begin interviewing for jobs. I doubled in accounting and finance, but most of the interviews I took were with accounting firms. Interestingly enough, 2 of the 4 interviews I took, you'll probably recognize these names, were with Arthur Andersen and Adelphia Cable, both massive firms that went virtually bankrupt in the next year. Now, fortunately, neither of them liked me enough to offer. Else
You
I
didn't
may
get Bear
have
Stearns in there?
What's that?
You didn't get Bear Stearns in there too or something?
No, I should have. That would have been a
Yeah.
great one to add to the
Trifecta,
list. Neither of them liked me enough to offer, else I may have been out of a job even sooner than expected. The other 2 on the list were KPMG and a smaller local public accounting firm. Now, if you haven't been in a position where you've had to make a choice that will alter your life forever, you will soon. And that's where I was at the time. I got offers from both firms. It was a really tough decision, but I decided to accept the offer from the local firm. And you might ask if there was something specific that convinced me to take what, at least on paper, seemed to be an inferior offer. I wish I could tell you there was some major epiphany that hit me, but really, it was more just fear of the unknown. I like being around my family. I was still big into the DJ scene locally. I've also had every one of my schooling experiences, kindergarten through grad school, and every job I've ever had within a 10-mile radius. So call that risk aversion, loss aversion, status quo bias, pick your favorite behavioral term, maybe even covered some of them last night.
We did.
Whatever name you want to put on it, I had a real fear of change. And so I went with the offer that I felt presented the lowest risk to me at the time. Maybe not the better one, but the one that certainly provided the lowest assessed level of risk. From there, let me fast forward you through the next few years. So we're talking 2003, 04, 05. I think, and maybe you'll agree with me someday, is that a tough part about the early portion of your career is you're supposed to like it. You catch up with former professors, classmates, other people, they ask you how things are going. You're supposed to say, I really like the job. You've put in all this time, all this energy, a lot of money. You went to school, you land a job that seems to be the pinnacle of everything you've worked for. You put it out there on social media, but then you get into it, and sometimes you realize it's more like purgatory than the Garden of Eden. And maybe I'm being overly cynical, but if you've ever watched the show The Office, great series, you're aware of some of the caricatures that are present in the corporate world. And I don't want to say my experience was like The Office, but it kind of was, just without the humor. And I'm using that reference on purpose because there was this girl I worked with who was basically a replica of Angela from The Office. And now, if you haven't seen it, that's fine. This story, I think, still does a good job offering a microcosm of what my initial experience in public accounting was like. I'm on this audit job in Smethport, PA. It's about a half hour's drive south of here. And in public accounting, you usually work on jobs with a team of other auditors. Sometimes those teams rotate, sometimes they stay the same. I get rotated onto a team with this girl. Let's just call her Angela to protect the innocent. Well, not so innocent, as you'll find out. A week goes by, most of the job gets done, and now it's Saturday afternoon, normally pretty chill time. And I get a call from my boss asking me to come into his office for a general meeting as soon as I can. And now there were 2 times in my career when he did that. Neither of them were good. Now, knowing me, I did not want to wait all the way until Monday to find out what was going on. I would have created some apocalyptic scenario in my mind of how that was going to play out. So I go in, my boss is there along with another of the firm's partners. That's highly unusual. So the apocalypse, that scenario, starting to seem a little bit more realistic. And he proceeds to tell me that my girl Angela filed a complaint that I intentionally falsified work paper documentation on this audit job, and they were taking the matter very seriously. It was a moment in time when I felt truly speechless, had no idea what to say. And just to get this out there, it wasn't true. It wasn't even one of those well-crafted lies that has a basis in reality. This was just flat out fabrication. I left that meeting with no resolution, feeling like I was, at 2 a.m. drunk stepping out of the OP. I couldn't walk straight, could barely drive home. I went straight to my parents' house and told my dad. My first reaction was that I just didn't want to deal with it. I wanted to, plead no contest, hopefully let the thing go away by itself. Sometimes that's the easiest thing to do in an uncomfortable situation. Fortunately, my dad counseled me otherwise. He's got a lot of experience in business, and he said that's the worst course of action. I needed to be proactive. And so we spent the rest of the weekend developing what my response was going to be. We went through step by step, documented my position, and first thing Monday morning, call up the partners, schedule a meeting with them. Long story short, I go in, present my position, convince them why Angela was basically the devil incarnate, and surprisingly enough, they pretty much sided with me, and she was the one who ended up getting disciplined. So it was a win, I suppose, but it felt kind of empty, sort of like winning a game by forfeit. But it was really the first time I saw how nasty the corporate world can be. Now, at the time, both of us were in the running for a promotion. And ironically, neither of us ended up getting it. Go figure. Now, I'd like to tell you that I was as mentally tough as I pretended to be in that follow-up meeting. I'd like to tell you that my performance didn't suffer after that, that I was able to use it as a positive learning experience and move forward. But to be perfectly honest, it definitely colored the rest of my time there. I'm going to move ahead in time a little bit more now. May 16th, 2007, to be exact. It was a Wednesday, and it was one of those dreary, kind of ominous days when it feels like a thunderstorm could roll in at any second. And maybe I'm revising history here to be a little bit more dramatic, but that morning, I get a call from my boss asking me to come in for a general meeting right after work. Now, I knew from past experience that wasn't a good sign. And what I'm about to tell you now, I've never told anybody outside of my immediate family. Wife, parents, in-laws, my brother Mike knows that's like 6 people. And so we are about to go from 6 to 56. And needless to say, this isn't easy to talk about. So I think before I just clam up, I'm going to get right out with it. At that meeting, the partner in charge of the firm thanked me for my time there, but said my services would no longer be required. So pack up your desk and be out of here in an hour. You know what it feels like when you get the wind knocked out of you? Your lungs collapse. You have a hard time breathing. In that meeting, I had to tilt my head back to keep myself from crying. There's this term in finance called a dead cat bounce. The idea being that if a stock or a cat, for that matter, is dropped from high enough, it's
You have
gonna.
to put the disclosure. Don't actually try it with a cat. Don't do that.
Thanks for that, Jim.
Yeah, you never know. Nate's in the class. I never know what's going to happen. So
Good point.
I'm going to put my cat down right now.
Okay, thank you.
So you drop that cat or the stock from high enough, it's gonna bounce back at least a little bit, even if it's still dead. In that meeting, I felt like the cat, but without the bounce. I was used to being a winner. I beat you, you don't beat me. I've been successful at just about everything I've set my mind to. But then at that particular moment, I felt like the world's biggest loser. There is something about cats, though, that I like. When they fall, they tend to land a certain way. I spent the next month after that on a paid vacation of sorts. I did have a little golden parachute to fall into, but struggling with a big life decision. what to do next. And at that point, a lot started to happen really quickly. I got a call from a former professor here at Bonas. If you're an accounting major, you certainly know the legendary Darwin King. If not, you're missing out on some of the best jokes you'll ever hear anybody tell. End of class every day. And by best, I really mean worst. Sorry, DK. But great guy all around. And he asked me if I would be interested in teaching a few accounting classes during the next semester. My first reaction was, but I didn't go to school to be a teacher. And to be honest, I can't even cut it at what I did go to school for. But the more I thought about it, the more I was open to the challenge. And let's face it, I didn't exactly have a lot going on at the time. So I called Darwin back and said, put me in, coach, I'm ready. That summer, I mapped out how I was going to teach financial accounting. And since then, my teaching style actually hasn't changed all that much. If you would have walked in to Accounting 201 during the fall of 2007, you would have seen a very structured, outline-based format for the class notes. We did a lot of practice problems. There was a competitive element to it, so the top student got exempted from the final exam. You get extra credit if you beat me in basketball. So far, nobody's earned it. The only difference, at least that I could see, was back then, I could show up at the gym to play hoops and pass myself off as a student a lot more easily. Still try to do that sometimes. I'll share this story. There is a student who's still at Bonas. He might even be on this call today. I'll leave his name out of it. About 5 years ago, first day of classes, it's Monday. I'm not going to be in the classroom until Tuesday, so nobody really knows me yet. I show up at the gym to play basketball, and there's this kid there, and he's pretty good. Sure enough, I end up getting on an opposing team, and we guard each other. Pretty physical guy. He's reaching in a lot. It's a foul every time, but in pickup, I don't like to call a lot of fouls because it slows down the game. So I think, all right, I'll fix this guy. Next time he reaches in to poke the ball, I stick my elbow in his face, and he catches his jaw hard right on my elbow. Stops the game, curses me out, says, what the blank is wrong with you? Meanwhile, has no idea who I am. I think he thought I was like a, I don't know, non-traditional grad student, gym class hero kind of guy. Well, sure enough, next day, I walk into my accounting class, and who's sitting there front and center? This same kid. And I wish I had my phone with me and took a picture of his face, because it was one of the best photos that would have ever existed. Blood completely drains from his face, has no clue that I was going to be his professor. And we still laugh about it to this day. We're good friends now, thankfully. But back to my main story. Something else happened during the summer of 2007. And that was a decision to start my own business. Now, when you get a job and you go to work, and if any of you are already there, you're free to disagree with me. But I think this goes for just about any career. I believe there is this implicit conditioning that happens. You're made to believe that you need the firm more than it needs you. You're a cog in the wheel, and while some companies really do make an effort to make you feel valued, there's no escaping that you're replaceable. Everybody is. So do your job, do it well, or we'll find somebody else who will. Now, you might end up with an awesome job at an amazing place. And if you do, call me up, tell me I'm dead wrong. I honestly hope you do. For me, it took a while, but when I stepped back and liberated myself from that conditioning, I realized that I could do just about everything that the firm I worked for did. I'm a CPA. I had enough schooling, enough training. I could take a financial statement audit through from start to finish. I could do your tax return or journal entries or bank recs, even basic business valuations. So in addition to planning out how I was going to pass myself off as an educator, I spent the summer developing a business plan for getting the Bysiek CPA accounting firm off the ground. A lot of that business plan was done here in the library at school, because at the time I didn't even have my own computer. One thing I did do was go door to door to every business in Olean. I introduced myself, dropped off a business card and said, if you ever need any kind of accounting service, let me be your man. I'm not sure how many places I stopped at. I should have kept count, but it was a lot, and proceeded to get a very low return on my investment. It's like cold calling people. You got to have thick skin. The calls I did get were for really hard accounting questions that didn't have easy solutions. One thing that in retrospect, I think I did do well at the time was start off with a grassroots philosophy that nobody was too small to help. Every question did have an answer. And if I really was going to be successful, I had to take care of the little guy. Another part of my marketing strategy was a direct mail campaign to clients who I had worked with in the past. And a lot of my previous experience was working with local not-for-profit agencies, organizations that generate revenues and incur expenses. So they have financial reporting needs, but unlike a regular for-profit corporation, they're not in business to maximize shareholder value. They have a charitable focus, some kind of mission that seeks to better the communities that they exist in. And my message was pretty simple. You and I have a good working relationship. How about we keep it going? And if it works out, you can likely save 15% or more on audit services. Great line. In fact, another much larger company came in and now uses that line in a lot of their ad campaigns. That message actually resonated really well. And within 6 months, I was off and running with 7 or 8 assurance clients, all of which are still Bysiek CPA accounts. But that reality that I was really in business now might actually have been the scariest part. I think that I present myself pretty well, at least I try to, and I evidently did well enough to con these executive directors into thinking I could handle their work. But the question that kept me up at night at the time was, what's going to happen when they find out I'm just a big fraud? There's this thing in psychology called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Maybe you've heard of it before, maybe you haven't. It's basically that unintelligent people tend to overestimate their ability, and experts tend to underestimate their ability. And at the time, I wasn't sure which end of the spectrum I was on. I was there somewhere, but just wasn't sure exactly where. And also back then, it was just me out there, answering phones, signing off on a zillion work papers, preparing these reports that we do for clients that is time consuming. There's a lot to it when you run your own shop. Now I've got interns who pretty much run the show. What's up, Dane? Hi, Kira. That year became such a whirlwind because things changed so much so fast. It was like March of 2020 for an entire year. And I think you remember the periods of your life that are the most tumultuous. Within a 13-month window, I lost my job, got engaged, started teaching, started my own business, bought my first new car, which I'm still driving, by the way. Don't want to let her go. Oh, and I got married too. Can't leave that out. I've been warned. And while things did settle down somewhat, at least professionally, the one constant has always been at least some degree of change. Our firm has grown every year for the past 12 years. The business plan has morphed over that time. We started off as this jack of all accounting trades practice. You need a bookkeeper that can handle all of your accounting needs. We can do it. You need me to prepare your tax return with the most off the wall and rare sources of income. We'll figure out how to do it. You need us to spend 4 hours on the IRS because we really didn't figure out your tax return to begin with. We'll do that too. I used to write these articles for the local newspaper on educating people how to prepare their own tax returns and then when to seek out a CPA for assistance. And I don't even like doing tax returns. Bottom line is it's tough to sustain that kind of enterprise as a one-man band. You just can't do it in perpetuity. So I learned relatively quickly the need to specialize, to separate myself from the competition. And within a few years, my specialization became performing assurance services, audits, reviews for nonprofit entities in the area. Organizations like United Way, SPCA, alcohol and substance abuse providers, various healthcare providers, all of these organizations serve a vital need in the community. And in this area, they have a very unique set of characteristics that facilitated our entry into the market. They're large enough that they require some type of assurance service from a CPA firm. But most of them don't have a large enough budget to contract with a big four or even a regional accounting firm. That reality has allowed us to find our niche in this market. We've got the capability of doing the work, and I've created a very low-cost model for delivering that service. I call it a VPO, virtual paperless office. I have no idea if I've invented that term or not, but I'm going to take credit for it today. It means that if you drive through town, you're not going to find any office space with the Bysiek CPA shingle hanging over it. Most of our work is either done remotely or at a client location. We don't keep paper-based files. Everything's stored electronically. And so with very little overhead cost, we're in a position to pass these savings down to our clients. It's one of the reasons we have a super high client retention ratio. The other thing that we have going for us is that at any given point in time, I'm the least smart person working for the firm. Totally true. And just like the basketball tournaments that I play in, if I'm the worst guy on the team, we've got to be at least pretty good. I also made a decision early on to find a way to continue teaching. Whatever's happening with the firm, however busy we get, whatever issues that come up, and there have been some big ones, even within the past 6 months, I would still make time to be a mentor for college students. For me, even though I am compensated for it, full disclosure, so it's not completely altruistic, it really has become my way of giving back a lot of that knowledge and experience that I've gained. Some of my peers ask me why I do so much teaching. And in a way, they pose a good question. It's a lot of potential billable hours left on the table. And my answer to that is the relationships. So many wonderful people over the years are in my life that I would have never had the opportunity to meet if it wasn't for these past dozen years of Bonas. And so while it has been a very wild, somewhat twisted road to get to where I'm at now, I think it demonstrates that you really can find fulfillment and joy in your career. There honestly hasn't been a day in the last 12 years that I haven't woken up being really excited to go to work. Honest to God's truth. You can balance your work with your personal life, and sometimes you can even do it in a small town. So that's my story. I'm happy to take any questions, whatever they are. I'm in full disclosure mode today, so feel free to fire away.
What did I write? Like, you have to send me a picture of that.
Can I just read the good parts?
Sure.
I'll read a little of both. Presentation skills, excellent. Good public speaker, indeed one of the best I have had. Great pacing, tone, hand gestures, all very good. So I guess I set the tone for being a future instructor. On the other end of the spectrum, only concern is group work, occasionally seemed as two separate presentations.
Probably because you were working at a job and you just jump in and I'm guessing. I don't know that.
Yeah, and there's a whole other story that goes along with it as well. We can save for part 2 of this, but
Okay.
yeah, that was, I guess, a summary of it.
Good.
I have a question.
Sure.
So when you were like first let go from the firm, was your like first like what was your first inkling to go towards like creating your own firm, or was it kind of like trying to figure out what was the next step, or I don't know how like to phrase that.
It took a while for me to get to that point where I thought I really could do it. My confidence was shaken in a major way. And when the dust initially settled, my first thought was to go back to school and get my PhD and be a full-time instructor. And I came really close to doing it. But as time went on, the prospect of starting my own firm and competing against my old firm became a bigger and bigger motivation for me. And coupled with the ability to know that I could teach part-time, at least in the near term, I thought I could have a best of both worlds scenario. And fortunately, that has continued to play itself out that way. Other questions?
I don't know if you mentioned it, but if you would have chosen KPMG, where would you have been located?
Buffalo office.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And I really did like that firm. I had some former classmates that were there. The woman who interviewed me, I thought I hit it off with really well. And sometimes that person you interview with is the face of that firm. That's how you see the entire firm. And when they make a good impression on you, just like when you make a good impression on them, that's how you associate the entire firm being. Other questions?
So I guess I will bring in another one. Breanna is on. I don't know. Did you have Breanna?
Reckonings?
No, Pietro. So
No.
Breanna, you want?
Don't
So
think I did.
last week we had a class and my brother hopped in. He was home and he stopped in for a second because she had him as a student as in seventh grade, and now me here at Bonas. You had a similar to Mahar teacher experience, right, at Walsh?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so he had my mom, and my mom spoke very high. I remember completely when one time she asked, do I know anyone in your class? And I mentioned, and she had all good things to say about you then too. So I might have been biased going in,
Your mom wins the nicest teacher I ever had award.
I would
And
probably agree with that.
I took Latin 1 from her in my junior year of high school. And I still remember a lot of her catchphrases from that class.
Very good. Yeah, so two people at least have had two Mahars in this group, in this thread.
It's cool.
Yeah. So I have a question. I think you kind of touched on it earlier. Once you graduated from college, how many places did you look at / interview with before you kind of knew that you wanted to settle down and take the job at the local firm?
I think I applied for 6 or 7 different positions. I ended up getting interviews with 4 of them and offers from 2 of them. And I have no idea if those percentages are typical or realistic, but I have to think they're not far off. If you have a halfway decent looking resume and you have a degree that provides direct entry into a particular field. So being an accounting and finance major, there tends to be a direct line into a profession. That may not be the case for every major. So my numbers may be a little bit off, but I remember feeling a little bit put out when I didn't even get an interview at those couple places. And I also felt a little bit put out when I didn't get offers from Anderson and Adelphia. But it's one of those things that you learn to condition yourself with, that you're not going to fit every position. You're not going to gel with every personality, and you just got to learn not to take it personally.
And then, sorry, I kind of have like a follow-up question onto this. Did you ever think about taking your like majors and maybe like skewing them in a different way and applying to like a job that sort of fit but was like a little bit different from like you said, like the path that like with your majors that like normally people like you would take? Like, did you ever think of like some outside type of jobs, or were you more just followed the straight and narrow path?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. What I really thought my outlet could have been, being an accounting finance major, but also being really into the DJ scene, was being a money manager for fellow DJs, especially the ones that made it big. So there's a handful of big time DJs at the time, guys like Paul Oakenfold and Tiesto. Now that might be like David Guetta, somebody like him. They're multimillionaires and they need somebody to manage their money. Why not have it be somebody that also shares an appreciation for music? So that was my alternative career route, but there was no precedent for it. I had no idea how to actually do that other than cold calling these guys, and you could never even get close to them. I remember I was on spring break in Cancun, March of 2001, and one of these world-renowned DJs was spinning at a rave club there. And I went to see him perform, and I tried to get access to him just to meet him, and I couldn't even get close to him. So that ended up drifting away. But I guess that's the first thing I can think of that pops into my mind to answer your question.
Thank you.
Sure.
Professor, when did you know that, like, when in your career did you know that, like, everything was concrete?
Say that one more time, Nick.
When in your career did you know, like, everything was concrete? Like, you weren't going to change, or, like, this isn't going to work out? Like, when you knew, like, you're going to stay doing this for the rest of your life?
I'll let you know when I get to that point.
All right.
But to be honest, I'm being a little bit
No,
flip.
but you're right, though. Like if I try to answer these questions myself, I wouldn't know that answer myself. So go ahead. But I'm looking forward to this answer.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, Nick. And while I may seem like perfectly settled and content with everything, I think the one thing that I have learned along the way is never completely believe that what you have going right now will always be there. And so while I absolutely love doing what I do, the mix of theory in the classroom and actual practice, there are a number of threats to that could change that and force me into something else. So while I feel content with what I'm doing, I think it would be naive of me to think that it will always be there just like it is now.
Makes sense.
Other questions?
Hi, Professor Bysiek. I have a question.
Sure, Macho.
Have you ever thought about expanding your firm and making it more regional, I guess?
Always a question, and I discuss this with my interns regularly. The trade-off with my business model, the low-cost approach that is really just me and a couple of interns, is that I really only have an employee for 2 years max, maybe sometimes a little bit more. And so there's this ever-changing dynamic in my practice, which unless I shifted to a different business model that would involve bringing on full-time employees, I think I'm stuck within a relevant range of activity. So we've grown every year for the past 12 years, but at some point, even with the efficiencies and economies of scale we gain every year, I will reach full capacity with my present business model and not be able to expand. So yes, it's always a concern. It's always something that I consider. But I guess I've taken the approach that I would much rather service my existing clients really well than to try to take on as much work as I possibly could just to be the biggest firm in the area. I also place a lot of value on being able to do other things in life. And so sure, I could max out on my billable hours, but there's a high opportunity cost to that. I like going to the gym and playing hoops. I like working out. I do it every day. I like hanging out with the kids and playing games with them. A lot of those things would be cut short if I decided to make the move and continue expanding.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, it's a great question. Anybody else?
Well, thank you very much, Ed. It was great. It was interesting. I'll have to admit, I did panic a little when you brought that paper out. I'm like, oh my goodness, what did I say? Yeah, thank you. It was really interesting.
You're welcome. Well, that paper obviously had an impact on me because I've kept it for
You
the
kept
past
it.
20 years.
Yeah.